is something else. There's this cascade of processes.
There is not a computer in the world with the capacity to handle the data, but more important, to handle all of the calculations of interaction and complexities of the climate.
People have to understand that the entire global climate change hysteria is driven by computer models. It is not driven by reality. Reality is not warming up like those models said it would.
If the theory of man-caused global warming is based on computer models, we need to know whether these computer models are accurate. Just like fingerprints are used to identify an individual, man-caused global warming has its own unique temperature fingerprint, which is different from naturally caused warming. Dr. Fred Singer, a leading physicist in climatology, founder of the Science and Environmental Policy Project, and former director of the Center of Atmospheric and Space Physics at the University of Maryland, provides a comparison of the expected temperature fingerprint of greenhouse warming and that of natural warming in his keynote address to the 500 participants of the International Conference on Climate Change in March of 2008.
We all agree on the methodology. We disagree on the results. The methodology is to compare the patterns of warming, the calculated pattern calculated from climate models with the pattern that's actually observed, and see if the patterns agree. These patterns are called fingerprints. To see if the fingerprints match. That's the issue. You're looking here at the pattern of warming derived from climate models. Every climate model has roughly the same pattern. This is the fingerprint of greenhouse warming. I'll explain it. In the middle, you see the equator. To the left, you see the North Pole. To the right, the South Pole. So this is latitude on the horizontal axis and height on the vertical axis. And what is characteristic of greenhouse warming is that the rate of warming, the warming trend, increases with altitude in the tropical zone and is roughly 2 times greater, or even more than 2 times greater, than it is at the surface. This big red blob that you see, centered at roughly 10 kilometers, 6 miles up, in the tropical zone from 30 north to 30 south, that is the characteristic fingerprint of greenhouse warming. Everyone agrees on that. That's in the IPCC report. We agree. Now let me show you the actual observations. No blob, no increase in warming with altitude. In fact, if you see that little blue area over the equator in the middle, that's a slight decrease in the warming trend. In other words, the fingerprint of the observations from weather balloons taken all over the world gives a result which is exactly opposite to that of the greenhouse models. The fingerprints do not agree. They do not match. This means that we can exclude a significant contribution from greenhouse warming, and therefore we must conclude that the warming is mostly natural.
Let me touch on what Dr. Singer said again. The atmospheric physics of greenhouse warming demands that warming occur faster at 6 to 10 miles in altitude in the tropics and at the mid-latitudes. Every climate model has this built into its equations, yet actual atmospheric measurements show the opposite. Therefore, Dr. Singer concludes that greenhouse gases cannot be causing global warming. This information was available to the IPCC when they wrote their report in 2007, yet they refused to include it. To me, this clearly shows an enormous bias by the United Nations IPCC. This discovery means the warming is mostly natural, and humans must learn to cope with it if it continues. If the fingerprint shows natural rather than man-caused warming, how do humans cope with natural changes in the climate system? As scientists study the past, they are finding natural cycles that modulate between cold periods and warm periods, just like is occurring in the Earth's climate today.
Climate is not a constant. We go through periods where it's much warmer, where it's much colder. We go through periods where it's wetter and drier. So the one thing we can say about climate in the future is that it will change.
History shows that storm frequency and intensity are greatest in colder periods. The extreme weather of the Little Ice Age provides a good example. Records show that storms were more severe, wiping out entire coastal villages. The Thames River began to freeze over during the harsh winters. So did the canals and waterways in the Netherlands. Starvation and plagues occurred all too commonly. Earth's climate was entering what scientists are now calling the Little Ice Age.
Condition is quite severe. In Western Europe, you can see people were actually praying in a church while the glacier is advancing. Essentially are praying that, please, God, don't let this ice coming and then ruin our village.
The Little Ice Age is part of a series of climate change eras that scientists have identified. In Europe, there was a warming period at the height of the Roman Empire, followed by cooling during the Dark Ages. The climate again warmed during the medieval period, followed by the Little Ice Age during the Renaissance.
The Little Ice Age ended at about 1850. So over the past 150 or so years, we've been in a cycle where the Earth has generally been warming.
This current climate cycle is what most people call global warming. We frequently hear that today's global warming is causing an increase in the incidence and severity of extreme weather, such things as hurricanes, blizzards, droughts, and floods.
For whatever reason, right now, it becomes quite newsworthy to go out and tell people that we are about to have apocalyptic climate changes. And the second you make that pronouncement, it's easy to go around the world and find examples to support your viewpoint. But it would have always been easy. There would be no time in Earth history when you would not have been able to go around the world and find damaging hurricanes and tornadoes and whatever. They are not linked to the buildup of greenhouse gases.
History, however, has shown that a colder climate has more frequent and intense storms.
The violent storms during the Little Ice Age were at least partly due to the mechanics of storm formation. Storms are formed when warm, moist air collides with cold air. The greater the difference between the temperature of warm, moist air and cold air, the more violent the storm. In this example, humid air is heated by the sun, causing the warmed air to rise through the colder air. As the humid air cools, the water vapor condenses into tiny water droplets, which form clouds. As more water vapor condenses, the clouds begin to grow in size until they can no longer hold the water droplets, and rain begins. The more humid the warm air and the greater the temperature difference between the two air masses, the more intense or violent the storm. Since global warming increases the temperature at higher elevations faster than at the surface, the temperature gradient declines, and the number of violent storms should also decline.
The relationship of hurricanes to global warming is similar. Data from the National Hurricane Center tend to show that warming causes decreasing hurricanes. During the 90 years from 1851 to 1940, the total number of major hurricanes per decade greater than Category 3 averaged between 3 and 7 per decade. This peaked at 10 during the 1940s. During the 1950 to 2000 period, the number of major hurricanes dropped to 4 to 5 per decade. This decline occurred during the period when CO2 levels were escalating. The total number of hurricanes averaged between 15 and 22 until the 1940s, when it peaked at 24 for the decade. From 1951 through 2000, the average number of hurricanes declined to a total of 12 to 17. Although the 2000 to 2010 period is not complete, the number of hurricanes appears to be only increasing to the pre-1950 level. In other words, increasing warming experienced in the past 50 years was accompanied by a decline in the number of hurricanes rather than the expected increase from global warming. Many believe that since the ocean temperatures and the air layer immediately above them will get warmer with global warming, more tropical storms and severe hurricanes will result, like occurred in 2005. However, that is not how carbon dioxide warming happens. Instead, man-caused warming warms the middle troposphere faster than the surface.
Greenhouse warming, you get more warming in the middle of the troposphere, the first 10, 12 kilometers of the atmosphere, than you do at the surface. There are good theoretical reasons for that, having to do with how the greenhouse works.
So instead of increasing the temperature gradient, which would cause more frequent and severe storms and hurricanes, the global warming theory states that the gradient should decline, thereby decreasing, not increasing the frequency and severity of storms and hurricanes. In summary, The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is highly politicized and not a reliable source of the true state of the science on global warming. Yet, that is where the media gets all of its global warming information. Instead, scientists have found that the fingerprint of man-caused global warming inherent in all computer climate models does not reflect the actual or real climate fingerprint that is occurring today. Instead, we appear to be experiencing a natural climatic cycle of warming and cooling. Global warming today is not unusual compared to the past. Rather, it is a part of a natural recovery from a much colder period called the Little Ice Age, during which storm frequency and severity was much worse than today. In our final lesson, we will review whether the ice caps in Antarctica and Greenland are melting, causing coastal flooding, and also the role of the sun on Earth's climate and the importance of CO2 to life on Earth. In Lesson 1 and 2, we learned that emerging science has shown that most global warming is a natural phenomena rather than a man-caused one. We have also learned that the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, is highly political and biased. What really surprised me, however, was the evidence that storms and hurricanes will tend to be less violent with man-caused global warming rather than more violent, as we've been told. Maybe you were surprised too. In Lesson 3, we will look at polar bears and melting ice caps, and then look at what emerging science is showing really causes global warming. Man-caused global warming proponents claim that because the North Pole is melting, polar bears are threatened with extinction. However, numerous studies have shown that all but one of the many polar bear populations is stable or increasing. The melting polar cap is not a threat to polar bears. They can swim in open oceans over 100 miles without a problem. Polar bears have managed to survive just fine through many other periods in the past 10,000 years in which it was much warmer than even the most pessimistic global warming predictions. But what about the Antarctic and Greenland? Won't their melting cause massive shoreline flooding? Al Gore makes this point in his video, The Inconvenient Truth.
If Greenland broke up and melted, or if half of Greenland and half of West Antarctica broke up and melted, this is what would happen to the sea level in Florida. This is what would happen to San Francisco Bay. A lot of people live in these areas.
Even the highly political United Nations IPCC states in their 2007 summary for policymakers that the most flooding that will occur by the 21st century is 59 centimeters or 23 inches. The only possible reason that Al Gore would use such an alarmist example would be to create a sense of raw fear in the video's viewers. In fact, the High Court of England actually agrees. The British High Court found that the inconvenient truth includes so many exaggerations and scientific errors that it ruled that the video could not be shown in British public schools without a disclaimer that it's a political film. Not only is Al Gore's assessment extremely exaggerated, but there's compelling evidence that most of Antarctica is getting colder and the ice cap is actually growing. The exception is the ocean along the Antarctic Peninsula in western Antarctica. Science studies in 2007 and 2008 have shown that this warming is probably caused by volcanic activity and not global warming.
The evidence for Greenland is even more dramatic. On July 15, 1942, 2 new B-17 Flying Fortresses and 6 new P-38 Lightnings flying from the United States to England were forced to make an emergency landing on Greenland's southern ice cap. The crew was rescued, but the planes were left on the ice. In 1988, Pat Epps led a team to find the missing planes. They expected to find them within 40 feet of the surface. They didn't. After several years of failure, the planes were finally found in 1992, 1 mile from the landing site and 268 feet below the ice surface. The team used hot water to dig a tunnel down to one of the planes to extract it. Dubbed the Glacier Girl, the plane was restored and is now flying again. The planes did not sink to a depth of 268 feet, nor did the glacier push them down to that depth. If that were the case, the planes would have been ripped apart and crushed beyond recognition. Rather, 268 feet of ice accumulated on them from 1941 to 1992. Although the results are complex, other research shows much of Greenland's interior ice cap is growing and only its edges are melting. In balance, there is only a slight decline for the entire continent. Al Gore ignores this and concentrates on the melting that is occurring on the edges of Greenland.
10 years later, this is what happened. And here's the melting from 2005.
Should we be alarmed about this melting? 800 years ago, Earth was considerably warmer than it is today. That is when the Vikings settled in Greenland. They found fertile fields and navigable waters teeming with codfish and seals. Generations had come to call this land their home.
So at the first they were farmers and settled on the large land, and they must have been very thrilled with the land they found.
Back then it was warmer, there was more trees. It was a very good farming land, very fertile, very green.
Rumors of this wonderful land must have spread, so you had more inhabitants. We think of this as a rough life, but they have had fashionable clothing and they have had time to play. It's been tough, but they have had good times as well.
The Viking communities in Greenland were vibrant and thriving by the year 1100. Within a few hundred years, they were all gone. The reason? Climate change.
The climate changed. That's a fact, everybody knows that. So it was getting very hard to be a farmer. And well, they didn't get enough hay for the animals. And the animals were freezing and starving, so the animals died. And when the animals die, the people die.
Around the year 1350, representative of the Bishop Brigada visited Western settlement, and he wrote home and told that there's no one here.
By the end of the 15th century, Greenland had grown so cold that all of the Viking people who had lived there for generations were completely gone.
They must have wondered, what happened to our climate system? I mean, did we do something to cause this? That would be really, really useful to learn from the Vikings' example. How do we go about coping with big natural changes in the sun and the Earth climate system?
Scientists have identified the recurring patterns of cooling and heating in the Earth's climate. What causes this cycle?
The sun is the key ingredient to climate. I mean, 99.9% of the energy on the Earth that goes into the climate system comes from the sun.
The sun, of course, in terms of its light energy output, is probably the only true external driver of the Earth climate system, because there is no other forces on Earth that would supply that amount of energy for the air to move around, the ocean current to move around, or trees to grow. So there is no doubt that the sun is the main driver and supplier of energy to the Earth weather and climate system.
The sun's magnetism has a profound effect on the Earth. The sun's magnetic fields experience regular natural cycles. Does this sound familiar? When sunspot activity is compared to temperature changes over the same period, a remarkable correlation appears. Radiation from the sun seems to contribute to variations in temperature and climate on Earth. This is important when trying to understand climate patterns. The sun's natural cycles are a primary driver of our climate's natural cycles.
You have such a strong indication that there is this close relationship between how much the energy output from the sun changes and then how much the temperature changes.
Dr. Soon is right. More and more scientific evidence points to the sun, although scientists don't know yet exactly how it works. Scientists have known for a while that the increased energy by itself is not sufficient to account for the warming of the Earth. That discovery originally encouraged the theory that the sun could not cause the warming, and therefore carbon dioxide must be the driving force. But scientists are discovering that is not the case. There seem to be other factors at work. One emerging theory seems to fit all the data and offers a far better explanation for the current warming than greenhouse gases.
It has been known since the 20th century that there appears to be a correlation between the incoming cosmic radiation and incoming low elevation cloudiness. The more cosmic radiation, the more cloud formation. Several Danish scientists led by Henrik Sevensmark confirmed that relationship in the early 1990s and found the correlation to be highly significant. They then set up an experiment to prove it. When a sun goes supernova, it emits a burst of cosmic radiation. As that radiation reaches the Earth's surface thousands of years later, it interacts with the atmosphere to bring water vapor molecules together. These molecules condense into water droplets in the lower atmosphere, which creates clouds. Low elevation clouds are highly reflective and reflect the sun's energy back out into space. The more clouds, the more sun that is reflected, and the less solar energy actually reaches the Earth to warm it, and the Earth's temperature drops.
As long as the cosmic rays are bombarding the Earth in high amounts, there will be greater cloud formation, greater solar reflectance, and cooler global temperatures. However, as the sun becomes more active, with solar flares and other activity, plasma made up of charged particles of mainly electrons and protons, called solar winds, stream out from the sun. While the Earth's magnetic field protects the Earth from the damaging effects of the solar winds, the winds keep the cosmic radiation from reaching the Earth and other planets, while giving us a spectacular display of the aurora borealis. With reduced cosmic radiation reaching the Earth, fewer clouds are formed. More of the sun's energy reaches the Earth's surface, where it causes heating and a warming Earth. In just 5 years, it can cause a 2% decrease in low clouds, which in turn equates to an increase in surface warming equivalent to about 85% of what is claimed for all carbon dioxide warming since the Industrial Revolution. In addition, Mars and other planets in the solar system also appear to be experiencing global warming, just like Earth. Although the theory is in hot debate within the scientific community, this evidence supports the solar-caused global warming theory and further weakens the carbon dioxide greenhouse gas theory. This is important when trying to understand climate patterns. Emerging science is showing that the sun's natural cycles are the primary driver of our planet's natural cycles. But what about the role that carbon dioxide, or CO2, plays in the Earth's climate? Is the warming being caused by human-generated carbon dioxide? Is it the sun? Or is it a combination of factors?
Humans do affect our environment, and one of the ways they do that is change the constituents in the atmosphere. I think the biggest driver is going to be other natural fluctuations, and carbon dioxide plays a small role in that.
The modern warming of Greenland has been going on since 1850, long before human-generated CO2 was entering the atmosphere. That raises another important question. Are higher levels of carbon dioxide as harmful as we've been led to believe? Is CO2 even a pollutant?
Carbon dioxide is not a pollutant. Carbon dioxide is a nutrient, a very important nutrient, perhaps the most important.
CO2 is something that plants love. They take up CO2, they use it, they give out oxygen. We take the oxygen and give out CO2. So it's hardly a pollutant at all. It's quite a naturally occurring gas that appears in our atmosphere, and is very important to sustaining life on this Earth.
In terms of the broad geological perspective, the carbon dioxide concentration of the atmosphere right now is low. Almost all the plants that we live with and depend upon for food evolved in an atmosphere when the CO2 was higher in the atmosphere, much higher than it is today, and higher than we could possibly get it even if we tried.
Well, as a matter of fact, there were times when life flourished on Earth. The time when CO2 levels were something like 10 times current levels was when the dinosaurs were running around, and that was when plant growth was so vigorous that they created all the oil and gas that we now use. It was a very fertile period of time for the Earth.
When we've looked at the literature on experiments that have been done with increasing levels of carbon dioxide, what we basically find is that most plants respond the same way. More carbon dioxide gives us more biomass. So if we look at a forest, a rangeland, a marsh, a wetland, or an agricultural field, what's really happening with more CO2 is that you have more plant material produced.
It's been estimated that the rising level of atmospheric CO2 have enhanced global food production by ranging from 8 to 12%. Now this is a universal